But when people ask questions that were very rational, logical questions, they got answers like, we don't know, that's not our expertise, you'd have to submit a pre-sub, the usual, we can't answer that question in a webinar.
My favorite was the answer to my question where they just said, that's what legal told us to say.
Okay, today we have Michelle Lott from Lean RAQA and Rob Packard from Medical Device Academy. And both of us attended this awesome webinar, or at least it could have been awesome, last week on the new biocompatibility guidance that the FDA released in September. And basically, the guidance document is identical to what was there before. They say they made all these other little changes, but honestly, I did a compare and merge in Adobe, and the changes are very minor. But the big difference is they added this new attachment. I believe it's H, right, Michelle? Is it H?
It might be G.
Okay, it might be G. Yeah, so you're probably right. So attachment G is the new attachment that they added. It's basically an annex at the end of the guidance where they talk about intact skin as a different, here's an alternate route to demonstrating biocompatibility of materials for a 510K or a PMA or a de novo. But there's limitations to it, but they give you a list of chemicals or materials that you could use to demonstrate this alternate route. And they have a guidance document that explains this to people, and they did a webinar that explains this to people. But when people ask questions that were very rational, logical questions, they got answers like, we don't know, that's not our expertise, you'd have to submit a pre-sub, the usual, we can't answer that question in a webinar, even though it's a logical question that everybody should have expected.
Yeah, my favorite was the answer to my question where they just said, that's what legal told us to say.
Yeah, so
we're not
share your screen, pull that up and show people what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is not our purpose isn't to roast the FDA. The purpose is to explain to people about this new attachment, but they need to understand a little bit more than what the FDA is offering up here.
Right. And you have to understand quality management systems as a whole to understand what they're asking you to do. And further, that what they're asking you to do might not be exactly what or where they meant for you to do it. Exactly. So here's the attachment G, where they're talking about the biocompatibility for intact skin. And then they say these things, and they glanced over this in a couple of comments. They included a couple of comments in their slide in the presentation, and it kind of hit me odd because they were like, you should document these statements in your device master record. And to myself, I was like, wait a minute. Normally you do these types of assessments in a device history file, and a device history master record comes out at the end of your process of creating the design history file, and it's like an index of how to build your product.
Yeah.
Some people even use like bombs.
Yeah, it's basically your table of contents of how to build your device, the recipe. It gives like a bill of material, work instructions, inspection procedures, any final test procedures in process test, maybe even the raw material incoming inspection. But if you look at the reference 79 that's down below, scroll a little bit lower. Yeah, so it says 79 is 21 CFR 820-181. So it isn't a typo. They didn't mean design history file. They meant device master record because they got the right reference. But basically, when I see somebody saying you have to have purchasing controls, you have to have production process controls, each of these things is part of the quality system regulation. So they could have saved themselves a lot of documentation here by saying you have to have a quality system.
And it must address your raw materials and how they're controlled in incoming and in process. And
So
you know.
if I were going to interpret what I think the FDA should have been saying, and when Michelle asked her question, she was the first one that asked the question. I was like, as soon as I heard the question, I was like, that's Michelle. I recognize her voice. So Michelle asked the question, like, didn't you mean this instead of this? And they said, well, what did they say again?
We're not experts in how or where manufacturers actually do these things. This is what legal told us where they put it.
Yeah, so that was a little bit disturbing to hear that they're not even trained in the QSR, but essentially, when they say device master record, yes, in a device master record, you would put your material specs there. You would put your process specs for how you manufacture it. So if you were picking something like silicone, you would say what temperature, what pressure, what fixture you were going to mold the silicone in or extrude the silicone in. If you had it final inspection, in process, incoming, you would say what those procedures are. That is true. But the logical place to come up with those items are in the design history file, and the device master record is just where you have the final like living version of that.
Yeah, or a recipe. I call it a recipe of how you're supposed to build the cake every time, with exactly this much of this, that much of this, and these temperatures in your oven and that cooling time.
Now, the other bullet points, purchasing controls. You are required, according to 21 CFR 820.50, to have an agreement with your supplier that says they'll notify you of changes, and you have to do a risk assessment of those changes before you let them do it. So if Dow Corning says we're going to change the formulation for you of silicone, oh, that's not good, because now I have to change everything in our testing to make sure the new material will pass. I also need to make sure that it'll have the same physical properties now that you made this change. And that's part of the reason why companies that make implant grade material don't make changes. They don't even want to change the packaging or the label on it. So that's number one on the list. Number two, production process controls. Temperature, humidity, time. Those are the basic things on molding. So all the plastics out there you can think of, they're all going to be temperature, pressure, and time. But you could have other factors too, like you can have post-cure. You could have some sort of coating that goes on. All kinds of things could be done to it. Every little step of that has to be documented, and you have to follow those procedures. And if it's automated, you have to validate it. And if you make any change in your manufacturing process, you have to assess what is the impact on biocompatibility. So, we have to follow production process controls. Nothing new there.
2 points, I see people say that I'm going to make a like for like change or just change a vendor on a raw material and not validate that all the way through the process.
Yeah.
And then lo and behold, it has some sort of different processing parameters that it maybe looks and feels the same, maybe passes its measurement specifications, but it gets out into the field and it's not as strong or as durable than the material they were using.
It would almost have been more helpful for them to explain how you would get a 483 if you didn't do these things, because this is what happens all the time. So the first item, if you don't have a control of your suppliers, they're not approved, they're not audited, you don't have agreements, all three of those are 483s. The next one, if you don't have a documented procedure, you don't have training on that procedure, you make changes to the procedure and don't validate it and retrain people and document it, all those would be 483s. Then you get to the receiving inspection, in-process inspection, final inspection. If you change your inspection process, now you have to make sure that the new inspection process is going to still result in a good product. So if all I'm doing is changing, before I was measuring it with micrometer and now I'm measuring it with a laser gauge, okay, that I can validate very easily with a gauge R&R study, and I can know that the precision and accuracy, repeatability and reproducibility is precise. But if I go from, I used to do a Shore calculation, now I have Joe squeeze it with his fingers, that's not going to fly.
That happens, people.
Yeah, I didn't come up with that by mistake. That's a real thing.
Yeah.
Not recommended way to get your warning letter, but
Yeah. How many people do you see receive things on certs for their raw material? And they don't even actually read the cert to make sure that the cert matches the specification. And then lo and behold, it doesn't.
Exactly.
Something's off.
So
I've had a
when was
cert
the
say
last
that something
time
failed the test.
when was the last time you saw a certificate that actually said we don't conform? There's no certificate of non-conformity. There's only a certificate of conform. We promise we conform, and it has a signature at the bottom, and it's always the same one. Nobody re-signed it. Nobody redated it. It's the same one you get every time. So it's not like somebody looked at all the manufacturing records and said, yes, I made sure everybody did everything the way they were supposed to. It's they want a CFC, so give them, photocopy number 4. That's what you're getting when you get a CFC. A C of A is a certificate of analysis. That means here is the test criteria, here is the test method, here is the acceptance criteria, here is the test result, and oh, by the way, here's the traceability to the gauge that I use in a date and signature.
You still need to read that, folks.
And if you have that, that's a C of A. I see a lot of C of A's that don't have all that information, but that's what you should be asking for. You should never, ever, ever, ever accept a C of C, because I've never, ever seen one that said we don't comply. They all say we can. It absolutely is exactly what you asked for. Now, what did you ask for again?
But even on a
I have seen a
analysis,
CFC for somebody else's product. I've seen a CFC for the wrong product, but I've never seen one that said it didn't conform.
Yeah, I've seen a certificate of analysis where it didn't meet the acceptance criteria and nobody caught it. Not the person releasing it, not the person preparing the C of A.
What's your reaction to this next item here, the analysis of quality data, but they reference a different section of the QSR?
Yeah, and that one's interesting because they include so many different things, and then they say at least annually, but you have to investigate every complaint at the time that it's in. So
yeah, I don't think the lawyer reviewed that one.
Yeah, no.
So dot 100, the subsection 100 is for Kappa. So in the Kappa section of the QSR, you are required to do a statistical analysis of Kappas. You're supposed to do a statistical analysis of complaints and other quality inputs to determine the need for a Kappa. But this is analysis of quality data. So if that was really what they wanted, it should have been 820.250 for statistical analysis. If it were an ISO standard, it would be 1345 8.4. But this says complaints and analysis of data, and it references Kappa. So another case where, like I said, I don't think the lawyers reviewed that one carefully. And then they have complaints right below it.
Yeah.
You would not review this annually. You would review it every time you had a complaint, like Michelle said.
I would almost have even bought management review as the reference here.
Yeah, that would have been much better. Dot 25 for management of the quality system would have meant a lot more sense. Management responsibility. And the FDA wants us basically to have a quality system. That's what this is saying. They aren't really providing any helpful guidance except in these bullet points here. Like, if you had a complaint that was about redness, swelling, irritation, sensitization, allergy, or immune response, then you should probably investigate that further, because those are signs of potential biocompatibility issues. They could also be signs of somebody didn't wash their hands.
Exactly. And for certain products, especially if it's for a new user, these are kind of a part of an acclimation process for using that. It's not related to a biocompatibility issue, but say for a bite mouthpiece that, is supposed to keep you from snoring. If you're not used to wearing one, your gums might be red. They might swell.
It could be you didn't brush your teeth and you ate a bunch of Doritos before you went to bed.
Yeah.
Who knows what the reason is, but you should investigate it. I agree with that. I agree you have to have records, and I agree you have to have a quality system. but this doesn't really help us. What would be helpful is to give more specific guidance as to best practices on how to do production process controls, how to do incoming inspection, how to investigate complaints specific to this type of issue, but they did none of that.
Exactly.
And they couldn't answer the questions. There was a really great question about block polymers. Great question. So usually a polymer is monomer, 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 monomer linked together in a chain. A block polymer is you have like this whole block is one monomer. They exhaust the ingredient, the monomer, you've used it all up. Then you add more monomer of a different type and you have a different block. And then you have a different block. So you keep on adding, letting it react, add some more, let it react. That's a block polymer. If it's called a block copolymer, you might have two different ingredients and you might alternate between them. But I think the question went right over their heads as what the person was asking, which shocks me because they're all chemists. So they
with a lot of letters after their name, a lot of letters.
Yeah, I'm only a bachelor's guy, and yes, it's a chemical engineering degree, but I'm not an expert analytical chemist. And these people have PhDs in analytical chemistry, and they can't understand the difference between a block copolymer and something that's a monomer. There's nothing in here about monomers. There's nothing in here about copolymers. There's nothing in here that even makes a lot of sense. They talk about urethane. Well, urethane, it can mean a whole lot of things. You buy two different urethanes from two different companies, and they won't even run the same. They say silicone in general. Was it platinum cured? Is it compression grade? Is it going to be a non-medical grade? So, we already had the PIP scandal in Europe for non-medical grade, and we had 300,000 women that had unsafe breast implants. I would think that would be an important issue to bring up, but no, they just write silicone. No other descriptor. And like,
not that it was industrial grade.
Nitrile rubber could be used for a tire. That's not the same stuff I want to be using for gloves. So yes, it's helpful that they made this guidance and they gave us an alternate pathway, but I could see so many opportunities for abuse of this policy. Natural fabrics, and then the middle one is a semi-natural.
It's the bane of clothing designers everywhere.
So rayon's a regenerate, like a cellulose derivative. So I don't know what they're thinking here.
Excluded. So I've got this list that's not nearly as specific as like Rob was talking about to really know, okay, are these really safe? But this is the safe list. And then they've got a much more specific table. So it would have been really helpful to have context around what made them include that, so that you had more guidance around the boundaries using a particular material of one variant versus another variant.
I would have been much more comfortable with something. I mean, if you read the reason for this section, the section was added because the FDA is trying to comply with the goal to reduce the amount of animal testing that's being done out there. And none of us in the medical device industry want to promote more animal testing. We already are appalled by the amount of animal testing that's going on to test biocompatibility. The guinea pigs of the world are fearful of the medical device industry. But all they had to do is say, we'd like to see at a minimum cytotoxicity testing. That would have given me so much more confidence. If you had a passing cytotoxicity test, no guinea pigs were harmed. We killed some cultured CHO cells, so Chinese hamster ovary cells, which we grow in a lab. They're not a living hamster, the ovary cell here. They're something we grow in a lab in a petri dish They're not a living entity. They're just a cell. And we're seeing, did it kill the cell or did it not kill the cell? So these Petri dish tests are basically a microbiology test that's extremely sensitive. And that would have been a great barometer. Like, if it has a passing cytotoxicity test and it's on this list and you didn't meet any of these exclusion criteria or didn't fail on any of these exclusion criteria, we're good with this product. But they didn't do that. They're asking for no data. It just, we promise that we're going to comply with all these things.
And then what do you think, Rob? Do you think they actually trained all the reviewers who are going to be looking at cytotoxicity data? And like, how many questions do you think we're going to like follow this to a T and then get pushback?
But there will be companies that will follow it to a T and they'll get through with questions. There'll be companies that don't follow it and will get through without questions.
Mm-hmm.
We know that will happen. Somebody will, it's just, it's a poorly written guidance.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a lot of opportunities for unsafe things to get through.
Yeah, and it's written by people who've never had to do it in practice. And apparently, I highly suspect the legal team reviewing this also has not ever had to physically do any of this in practice.
This particular topic made me wake up in the middle of the night last night thinking about this. So I'll express what I was thinking and see if you can come to the same conclusion I did. If you had a CPAP mask, so a CPAP mask is a silicone mask that goes over your face, has a head strap, and then it has a hose that goes out to your CPAP machine. That's the old style anyway. And the CPAP mask is usually made out of silicone, but it's reusable. So the person would use it over and over and over again because they're not going to buy a new one every day. So because it's reusable, they have to clean it. And because it's reusable, that guidance excludes it. And the rationale behind that is over time, you're going to have things build up that could cause sensitization. Or you could extract, this is what they said in the meeting last week, was you could extract things from that silicone mask that you wouldn't normally extract in a single day, which isn't true, actually, because they extract for 72 hours at 37 degrees in solvent. So you're going to extract things you would never extract in the real world because that's worst case. But if I have the duration of exposure is reusable, the whole reason why the rationale behind why you should not allow it should not be you're going to extract more things. The reason why is you could have buildup over time of the cleaning agents. Mm-hmm. That should be a reason. And the soil. So the skin of your face is going to come out on that mask. You're, to be a little bit gross, I mean, you're going to drool a little bit in the middle of the night, and that's going to be on the mask, and you're going to have to clean off the mucus, and you clean off the dead skin cells and the dirt and whatever else. When you sneezed, you clean off and that builds up. That's a synthetic soil that we have to simulate. And if you're going to use it for a year, that's 365 times. You got to soil it and clean it, soil it and clean it, soil and clean it. And then we test that for biocompatibility. Now, why do I have to do sensitization and irritation on the mask prior to that and after that? If it was a single-use device and it wasn't reusable, I could have used that attachment G because it's silicone. So I wouldn't have to do any of that testing. But if it's excluded, why do I also have to do the prior to all the soiling? I should not have to do that. I should only have to do the testing for the cleaning validation. And I shouldn't have to be looking for, I mean, I understand they think that the answer is because you could extract something more, but it's not true. There's nothing you're going to extract out of a silicone mask. Silicone is going to be 100% cross-linked if it's medical grade silicone. There's nothing you're going to extract out of there because there's no monomer left to extract. So the only thing you're going to get out of that is mucus, water, cleaning agents, stuff like that. whoop, I didn't realize I was half asleep. I grabbed a Coke from the side of the bed. I poured it into my mouth and spilled all over my mask. That's the kind of stuff that's going to be on your mask, not silicone monomer. So I would say that what they should have been doing here is saying, you know, if you have a reusable product, we need cleaning validation. And here's some guidance on cleaning validation, or go see this guidance on cleaning validation. We do not need more guinea pigs to be killed so we can prove that silicone is still safe. We need you to do the reusability and cleaning validation. But they weren't using logic because they don't know how this stuff works.
Right.
So I'm just, it's more examples of people that don't know how medical devices are developed and don't understand how we select materials and how the manufacturing process work, making laws and writing guidance documents.
And so, folks, that's why I am so always on my soapbox about why, when there are draft guidance documents, it's so important that you leave a comment and send your comments into the Federal Register prior to it closing, because they do have to read and at least internally respond to all the comments that industry's left. And so it's kind of like not voting and then complaining about the government later. You're going to be stuck with whatever nonsense that is in that draft guidance document that the FDA is running on, if you will.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, and I'm not any more impressed with the ISO standard for this. The 10993 standard tells you what you're supposed to do for biocompatibility, and they've got us doing extractables and leachables instead of doing animal testing on a material that's been characterized for the last 100 years. And we shouldn't have to do extractables and leachables on a material that's been characterized for 100 years. We should be able to provide a scientific rationale for, you know, Dow Corning hasn't changed their formulation in 30 years, and we're pretty good that it's safe. But nope, the standard says that we need to pay the Cytotox lab a little bit more money this year because their budget's thin.
Yeah, a little bit more extractable.
Well, okay, $100,000.
Yeah, that's all. Instead of a guinea pig test, we should pay them 6 figures for a single test.
Yeah, and you know, guess who wrote that that guidance or that standard? The head of toxicology and extractables and leachables for Nelson Lab, babe.
All those big boys.
Well, that's who it actually was, and it wasn't just him. It was the whole entire group. The whole committee was a bunch of toxicologists that specialized in extractables and leachables. So they might have been a bit biased. But like, well, of course, extractables and leachables is the best way to do it because that's the only thing we know. You know, if you're a carpenter, everything looks like a nail. It doesn't look like something that needs soldering. So I mean, it's the ISO 10993 guidance is not really well written. It's geared towards the people that wrote it, that are toxicologists that want to do extractables and leachables. And the FDA guidance is written by people that are really comfortable with these CM3 tests and have been using it for the last 50 years. And, you know, that's the way we're going to do it because that's the way we've always done it. They tell us we got to come up with a new and improved method that saves some guinea pigs. So we'll just say, you know, these class 1 devices that touch intact skin that we see all the time, we're not going to make them do any more testing on that. Just provide a certification statement. Sounds good.
Yep.
No testing to back it up. Not even the cytotoxicity test that wouldn't have hurt any animals at all.
I guess the only good thing is that when clients complain, because I used to, you know, how many times have you heard, oh, these materials have been around for 40 or 50 years. We don't need to do any biocompatibility.
It's grass is my favorite. Anything that is grass status is good for your Tupperware container. Has absolutely nothing to do with medical devices. It's a food status, food preparation materials, has nothing to do with medical devices that touch the skin. because you don't chew on your Tupperware.
Mhm.
You
At
don't
least you
wear your
don't.
Tupperware. Nobody wears it as a face mask.
Mhm.
You don't wear it as a glove,
Mhm.
And even the safe gloves that are made out of biocompatible material, you still have people that break out in rashes all the time on it. So
Mhm.
just because it's biocompatible doesn't mean somebody won't have redness and swelling.
Exactly, especially for something with perpetual contact.
Yeah. What is the reason? Because your hands are hot and sweaty and you were wearing it all day.
Mhm.
So that's our rant.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any other way to complain about it, is say this is a rant.
Thanks for joining us on our soapbox, people.
Yep. And so, but we do have very specific ways to decide what testing you should do, and we can show you how to take advantage of this pathway. But the best thing to do is honestly use your brain a little bit, and yes, you should only use materials that have been already tested in the past for biocompatibility. They have a history of safety, and they're used by other devices. And you should really think twice before you go out and use brand new materials that nobody's tested before. But this guidance is just inviting. I'm not saying that it's going to be a disaster, but I'm going to say there are definitely going to be some people that take advantage of this and get some products that are not safe on the market. And
Mhm.
there's still going to be some people with perfectly safe compounds that are going to have to go out and kill some more guinea pigs.
Mhm.
So, but this is the new guidance. This is what the regulations say. There will be people that take advantage of it and use it for good and use it for evil. So, yet another bad guidance is approved.